My mother abandoned me with one cold action when I was 7. 16 years later, I returned with a painting and a voice that made her tremble and run. Hello, my name is Dakota, and once my mother took me on a picnic, just the two of us. She packed my favorite juice box, told me she loved me, wheeled me to the edge of a cliff, and left me there. They all believed I died. She even built a statue of the daughter she threw away. 16 years later, I came back, not with rage, not with screams, but with a painting and a voice she thought would stay buried forever. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by your own family, then rise right in front of them while the whole world watches? Let me show you. I always knew something wasn't quite right between me and my mother. But that morning, I pushed those feelings aside. The sun had barely touched the rooftops of our Sacramento neighborhood when I heard her heels click across the hardwood floors. She was humming, actually humming. That alone should have tipped me off. Claudine didn't hum. She didn't do soft. Everything about her was polished, poised, and so perfectly curated, it made my little hands sweat just being near her. But that morning, she packed a picnic basket. I remember watching her from the hallway, the way she neatly folded the red gingham cloth and placed it on top of the Tupperware like she'd done it 1,000 times. Truth was, I'd never seen her do it once. "Mommy," I said, slowly wheeling into the kitchen. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, they didn't roll or look past me. "Morning, baby," she said with a smile so gentle it made my chest ache. "We're going on a picnic. Just you and me." Just you and me. I was 7. That phrase felt like a promise, not a warning. My fingers twitched against the armrest of my wheelchair. I'd gotten good at reading her tone, the way her voice shifted depending on who was watching. But this time, it was just us. No neighbors, no campaign aides, no phone in her hand, just her and me. And I believed her. The car ride was quiet. Her phone, for once, wasn't glued to her ear. She kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other gently resting on the gearshift, tapping her manicured nails to the rhythm of a soft jazz track playing on the radio. I remember the way the light sliced through the windshield and landed on her cheekbones. She looked like a painting, flawless, distant, untouchable. I tried not to talk too much. I'd learned over the years that my voice annoyed her. I was too eager, too loud, too full of the kind of love she never seemed to want. But that day, I couldn't help it. "This is nice," I said, clutching my crayons in my lap. "I like the sound the trees make when we drive past them." She didn't look at me, just nodded and whispered, "Just you and me, baby." We drove for over an hour, winding through back roads and narrow trails lined with towering pines. I didn't recognize the area, and she didn't explain, but I didn't care. I was too busy memorizing the way her perfume mingled with the scent of the forest coming through the half-cracked window. When we reached the overlook, she parked without a word. The spot was beautiful. It sat at the edge of a narrow cliff where the land dipped dramatically into a deep gorge filled with trees and the soft rush of a river far below. There was a metal guardrail a few feet away, rusted and bent, with old vines crawling up its side like the forest wanted to reclaim it. She stepped out first, moving around to my side. Her hands were firm as she lifted me from the car and placed me into my wheelchair. Then she grabbed the picnic basket, the blanket, and my crayon pouch. We rolled forward together, her heels crunching against the gravel. "Here's a good spot," she said, stopping just short of the edge. She spread out the blanket, laid the food neatly, and opened a juice box for me. It all felt off, not because it wasn't nice, but because it was too nice. Like she was following a script someone handed her at the last minute. Still, I smiled. "This is the nicest thing you've ever done for me, Mommy," I whispered, half afraid that saying it out loud would ruin the moment. She froze. I saw it, a flicker, a shadow crossing her face so quickly I almost missed it. Her hands twitched as she adjusted the basket, her eyes scanning the treetops instead of meeting mine. Then she stood slowly, deliberately. "You know," she said, stepping behind me, "sometimes we have to make hard choices, grown-up choices." I turned slightly in my chair to look up at her. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, her hands gripped the handles of my wheelchair. "Mommy." My voice cracked. She leaned in, whispering so softly I barely heard it. I have to let go. The next moment unfolded like something from a dream, slow, syrupy, too quiet. The chair rolled forward. Not fast, not with force, just forward. I remember the way my heart dropped before my body did. The edge of the cliff loomed, then disappeared beneath me. The sky tilted. The sound of the wind rose in my ears. My crayon spilled from my lap, catching the light like confetti. And then I fell. I didn't scream for help. I screamed for her, not because I thought she'd come running, but because a part of me still believed she might change her mind. That part of me died before I hit the water. The fall wasn't long, but it felt endless. I saw flashes of birthday cakes never lit, of drawings never pinned to the fridge, of moments I begged her to love me. The impact stole my breath. Cold enveloped me. I sank fast, my legs dead weight, my arms flailing above me. The world closed, and she just walked away. I remember the sound of her heels on the gravel as clearly as I remember the words she left me with, "She'll understand one day." I didn't. I don't. And maybe I never will. The moment the water swallowed me, everything changed, not in the poetic life flashes before your eyes way they talk about in movies, but in the cold, hard, breath-stealing, limb-locking sense of real fear. My body hit the river with a force I hadn't expected. 1 second I was weightless in the air, my mother's face blurring into sky and light, the next, the world was water. The shock of it knocked the wind out of me. My arms flailed, my legs, nothing, dead weight. The same lifeless, stubborn limbs that had betrayed me on playgrounds and at family cookouts now dragged me down and down and down. The water was deeper than I thought. Or maybe I just wasn't strong enough to fight it. I kicked, well, I tried to, but my legs didn't move. My fingers clawed at the current. My dress wrapped around me like it was trying to keep me under. It was quiet down there, not peaceful, never that. It was the kind of quiet that screamed, "Why?" That was the only word in my head, not help or please or even mom. Just that single, searing question that cut through the panic like a blade. Why? Why would she do it? Why would she bring me all the way out here, smile at me, lay down a blanket, open a juice box, let me draw, and then push? I wasn't afraid of drowning. I was afraid that no one would know I ever existed. That's the thing they don't tell you about dying. You don't panic because it's ending, you panic because you realize you never mattered enough to be missed. But then, just when the current pulled me so hard I felt my grip on everything loosening, my hand slammed against something solid, rough, wet, alive, a root. A thick, gnarled tree root jutted out from the slope beneath the cliff, tangled in mud and moss. I didn't think. I just grabbed it. My palm scraped open against the bark. My shoulders screamed. My whole body trembled. But I held on. I don't know how long I clung there, half submerged, the water slamming into my side. I couldn't pull myself up. I couldn't go back down. I just hung between the river and the rocks, between life and the lie she left me with. Don't panic, I told myself, echoing a magazine I once read in a hospital waiting room. Float on your back. Tilt your head. Push water with your hands. But every time I tried to let go of that root, I started to slip. My legs pulled me under like anchors, so I held tighter, until my fingers ached, until I couldn't feel them anymore, until I was sure this stretch of tree and water would be my grave. And then, through the roar of the river, I heard it, a voice, rough, male, desperate. Hey, hey, hold on. I wanted to turn my head to see where it came from, but I couldn't move. My arms were locked in place. My neck burned. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would drown out everything else. Boots splashed into the water. Hold on, little one. I've got you. The voice was closer now, so close I could almost believe it was real. And then warmth. Strong arms wrapped around my torso, one hand gripped under my armpit, the other around my waist. The root slipped from my grasp as I collapsed into the stranger's hold. I've got you, he repeated, breathless. The river fought back, but he didn't let go. He stumbled back through the water, one step at a time, dragging both our bodies to the shore. When we reached land, he laid me down on the muddy bank, cradling my head against his knee. I coughed violently, half water, half shock. The world tilted again, but this time it wasn't the sky flipping. It was my heart, my chest, the ache of being saved when I hadn't been worth saving just hours ago. "You're all right now," the man said softly. His voice was rough but gentle. I blinked up at him. He had a long beard, wet from the spray, eyes tired but kind, maybe in his late 50s, maybe older. His coat was soaked, but he didn't seem to notice. "What's your name?" he asked, wrapping a coat around me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "Okay," he nodded. "That's all right. We'll figure it out." He lifted me again, cradling me in his arms like I was 5 years old and made of feathers. And even though I was soaked, shivering, bleeding from my palms, and wearing a dress now stained with mud, I had never felt more held. The cabin smelled like cedar and old books. There was a fireplace already crackling, a wool blanket, a chair carved by hand. The man moved with quiet efficiency, drying me off, changing me into a worn flannel shirt that hung off my shoulders like a coat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. Just fed me warm broth, wrapped my hands in gauze, and sat nearby. "You were holding on like you meant it," he finally said that night while I lay curled on a small cot. "That tree root didn't stand a chance." I managed a weak smile. "Do you want to tell me your name?" he asked again. I hesitated. "Dakota." The name sat on the edge of my tongue, bitter and sharp. She gave me that name, and with it, everything that had happened before the fall. So I shook my head. "All right," he said. "How about sky?" I blinked. He nodded to the ceiling. "That's what you were fighting to see again, wasn't it?" It stuck, not because it felt right, but because it didn't hurt. While I learned how to breathe again inside that cabin, the world outside moved on, or more accurately, rewrote itself. In Sacramento, my mother stood at a podium dressed in black, surrounded by candlelight and pity. She cried on cue beautifully. Her voice cracked when she said, "She was everything to me." The cameras loved it. She filed a missing person report the next day. Then, less than a week later, a death certificate, accidental fall. No remains found. No remains. That part stung, not because I wanted a funeral, but because I wasn't even worth being looked for. Claudine commissioned a statue, a little girl in a wheelchair, head tilted toward the sky. The plaque read, "In loving memory of my daughter." No name, no dates, just memory. And in that memory, I had never been real. Back in the cabin, I watched the fire crackle and refused to cry. Elmer, that was his name, I learned, didn't push me to talk. We shared meals in silence. He taught me how to sharpen a blade for carving, how to patch flannel, how to read cloud patterns. We lived simply, quietly together. And I never asked to go home because home was a place that let me fall. I didn't belong anywhere anymore, I thought one evening while tracing the lines of the route I'd drawn in charcoal. Maybe this was enough. But safer doesn't mean living. That realization came to me slowly, like sunlight through fog, reluctant, but steady. The first days in Elmer's cabin were a blur of silence and warmth. The fire became my heartbeat. The sound of his boots crossing the wooden floor told me I wasn't alone. That was enough at first, enough not to cry, enough not to ask questions. He never pressed, and I never explained. We had a rhythm, quiet and unspoken. Mornings, he'd chop wood or tend to the small garden out back. I'd sit near the window watching. If I was strong enough, he'd wheel me outside and let me rest beneath the pine tree near the stream. No TV, no phone, no mirrors. I liked it that way. One afternoon, maybe a week or so after he pulled me from the river, he started hammering boards near the front porch. I watched from the open doorway, arms wrapped in the same blanket he dried me with that first night. "What are you building?" I asked, surprising both of us. He looked up, wiping his brow. "A ramp. Thought maybe you'd like to get out there on your own." That was the first time I felt something shift. No one had ever made a space for me without being asked. My mother only ever made room for herself. "Thank you," I murmured. He nodded once and kept hammering. We were two ghosts sharing one silence. But somehow, it was the kind of haunting that made you feel more alive than dead. In the evenings, Elmer would pull out a small wooden box filled with carving tools and odd scraps of material. He'd show me how to smooth a block of cedar, how to follow the grain. My hands weren't strong, not yet. But I watched. One morning, while searching for a pair of socks in a drawer he let me use, I found a stack of blank paper, thick, textured, untouched. And just like that, something inside me lit up. I didn't ask for permission. I just started to draw. At first, it was simple: trees, the outline of the cliff, the river. Then the images came sharper, darker: roots tangled around ankles, a pair of legs dangling over the edge, a girl falling through air, arms flailing, no face. I didn't realize Elmer had seen the sketch until he left a new pencil on the edge of the table the next morning. He didn't say a word. That's how we spoke, through offerings, not questions. He started telling stories soon after, not full ones, just pieces. How he once lived in a city, Portland maybe, or Seattle, he never specified. How he had a daughter once, a quiet girl with a love for messy painting and oversized sweaters. She died, he said one night as he handed me a mug of warm tea. Leukemia. She was 10. I looked at him, unsure what to say. She had more grace in her pinky finger than I've got in my whole damn body, he added. World didn't care what I lost, so I came out here and built my own. He showed me a painting later, one he kept hidden behind a loose board in the cabin wall, dark, layered and broad, angry strokes. Not beautiful, not sad, just raw. It didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded to be witnessed. I understood that kind of art. It was the kind you made when you had no other way to scream. We didn't talk about the outside world. I didn't ask, and Elmer never offered. I didn't want to know what my mother was saying, what lie she'd spun, whether anyone cared I was gone. The cabin became its own calendar. I learned seasons by the way the air shifted through the cracks in the wall, by the thickness of the fog in the mornings, by the way Elmer's bones ached more when it rained. Time passed, not in days or weeks, but in sketches. I drew everything, not because I was good at it, but because it kept my hands busy, because it kept the memories from filling the room. One winter, the wheel on my chair snapped. Elmer didn't curse, didn't blame me. He just got out his tools and fixed it like it was any other thing worth saving. No use in throwing away something that still works, he said. I knew he wasn't talking about the chair. No one remembered me, but I was starting to remember myself. Sometimes at night I'd dream in color, bright reds, deep blues, the yellow of a juice box. Other times I'd dream in silence. I'd hear my own voice calling out and no one answering. I'd wake up gasping but never screaming. One evening after we finished dinner, beans, potatoes, and half a biscuit, we sat on the porch watching the last sliver of sun dip behind the trees. Elmer lit a pipe, puffed once, and said, "You ever think about going back?" I hesitated. "Back where?" I asked. He didn't look at me, just blew out smoke and said, "Wherever you came from." I shook my head. Not really. He didn't press. But the question lingered. Later that night, as I traced a new sketch, this one of two figures sitting on a porch, I found myself asking, what if someone forgets to come back for you? Elmer sat still for a long time, then quietly, then maybe they were never meant to stay. That hit harder than I expected. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was just true. That night, I tucked the drawing under my mattress and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Somewhere out there, my mother had buried me in a lie. And maybe for her, that was easier than facing the truth. Maybe pretending I was dead gave her the freedom she thought I stole. But here in this cabin, in these woods, in the quiet hum of fire and fresh pencil on paper, I wasn't dead. I just didn't have a name anymore. And for the first time, I was starting to be okay with that. For years, the cabin had been a world of woods and silence. No news, no noise, no past, just the soft creak of floorboards, the rustle of wind through pine needles, and the rhythm of Elmer's breath as he moved through each day with the steady patience of someone who'd already buried more than he could bear. I didn't ask for more, and for the longest time, I didn't want it. But time has a way of wearing down even the thickest walls. It was late spring, just after the thaw. Elmer's knees had been bothering him again, enough that he finally agreed to let a young guy from the edge of town start dropping off supplies once a week. A kid named Mason, maybe 20, maybe less. The kind of boy who didn't ask too many questions because he didn't want to be asked any in return. He brought coffee, canned goods, matches, a little gas for the generator, and one day, an old clunky television set that looked like it had survived 2 decades and a few fist fights. "Got it from the thrift shop," he said, wiping dust off the top with his sleeve. "Still works if you slap it right." I didn't say thank you, but I didn't stop him from plugging it in either. At first, I ignored it. I didn't even know if the antenna could pick up anything worth watching out here. But Elmer, in his quiet way, started turning it on sometimes in the afternoon, especially when his joints ached too much to chop wood. He'd let it buzz through static until the signal caught something, a weather update, an old western, a rerun of some soap I'd never seen. Most days, I'd pretend not to listen, but some part of me, maybe the part still wondering if I mattered, started tuning in. One afternoon, Elmer had dozed off in his chair. I sat near the window, sketching a willow tree from memory. The air smelled like cedar and onion. Mason had dropped off stew ingredients that morning, and I'd simmered them slow, just the way Elmer liked. The television was on, softly, humming in the corner. I wasn't paying attention, not really, until I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 16 years. Claudine Jameson, local philanthropist and candidate for mayor of Sacramento. The pencil snapped in my hand. I didn't move at first, just stared at the screen like I'd been slapped. There she was, older, yes, but still glowing in that manufactured, untouchable way, hair styled to perfection, eyes moist but not too red, a black dress fitted just enough to whisper sophistication. And beside her, her husband, a man with a face I recognized but couldn't place right away. A mother who lost her daughter in a tragic accident, the reporter was saying, and found purpose through pain. I couldn't breathe. They showed clips from her campaign rally, smiling, embracing children, waving with her husband's arm around her waist. A voiceover explained how she turned her grief into advocacy, how she'd been named to the governor's advisory board on family welfare, how she dedicated her career to making sure no other mother suffers like I did. My hand clenched the wheelchair's armrest so tightly the skin pinched. And then I remembered him, the man beside her, now her husband. I remembered the way he used to visit our house late at night, the way my mother would tell me to stay in my room, the voice once overheard behind a closed door, deep, annoyed, frustrated. "You want me to marry a woman dragging around a crippled kid?" The words hadn't made sense at 7. But now at 23, they hit like ice water to the spine. So that was the deal, trade the kid for the ring. The news segment rolled on, showing her at a sculpture unveiling, a bronze statue. A small girl in a wheelchair, head tilted upward, eyes full of stars. The plaque read, "For my angel Dakota." I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just stared. She made me a ghost and then turned my grave into a campaign slogan. Elmer came in from the garden around that time, his boots muddy, hands calloused and dirt-stained. He paused when he saw me staring at the screen. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He followed my gaze to the statue, then to her face, then back to me. "You all right?" he asked. My voice felt rusted when I used it. "That's my mother." He looked again slowly, as if trying to reconcile what he saw with the quiet, angry storm suddenly radiating off me. "She's running for mayor," he asked after a pause. I nodded. "And telling the world I died." He didn't say anything for a while, then gently, "You need me to turn it off?" "No," I whispered. "I need to see it." We watched together the way people watch old wounds reopen. The screen showed her giving a speech at the dedication ceremony, her hands folded at her chest, her voice trembling. She was my light, my everything. And when I lost her, I thought I'd lost myself, too. Liar. Every word a carefully measured note in her symphony of self-preservation. "She wasn't sorry," I murmured. Elmer looked at me. "She was strategic." He nodded slowly. "People like her usually are." I stared at the statue again, at the name on the plaque, my name, the name she gave me, the name she tried to bury. "I didn't die," I whispered. "I know," Elmer said. "She just buried me alive." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed and the fire had burned down low, I sat at the table and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I didn't draw. I wrote 3 letters, Dakota. It felt like an incantation, a resurrection. The name stung like a wound being cleaned, but it was mine. I sat with it, breathing slow, steady, remembering everything and choosing not to run from any of it. When I finally set the pencil down, Elmer appeared in the doorway, his blanket over one shoulder. He didn't ask what I'd written. He just looked at me, quiet and steady. Some truths, he said, don't need to be screamed. They only need to be seen. And I nodded because that was the moment I decided. She wasn't going to erase me. Not again. The next morning, the cabin felt quieter than usual, not in the peaceful, pine-scented way I'd grown used to, but in the way a room feels just after someone has left it, like it still holds the memory of movement. I hadn't slept much. After writing my name, really writing it for the first time in 16 years, I stayed up watching the fire turn to ash. The embers glowed long after Elmer had gone to bed. I kept staring at the paper, the curves of each letter burning into my brain. It felt like reclaiming something I didn't know had been stolen. By sunrise, I was still at the table. My hands were stained with charcoal and my throat dry, but I felt steady. I hadn't felt that in years, maybe ever. Elmer came in carrying a small bundle of wild mint and set it on the counter without a word. He didn't mention the paper, didn't ask what I'd written, but I caught the way his eyes flicked toward it just once and then back to the kettle. That's the thing about Elmer, he never needed the whole story to know the truth. Later that afternoon, after we'd finished lunch, I took the battered laptop Mason had dropped off months ago and turned it on. It still worked, more or less. The screen had a faint line running through the middle, and the battery wouldn't hold more than 20 minutes, but I could get online with the weak signal if I stood near the back window. I hadn't used it much, occasionally to look up painting techniques or old artists' interviews, but today I typed in a name I hadn't spoken out loud since I was 7, Claudine Jameson. Her campaign website was the first result. I clicked. The screen loaded slowly, buffering images one by one. There she was, front and center, poised, polished, every strand of her hair sculpted into place. She was giving a speech in front of a community center, one hand over her heart, the other gripping a microphone like it owed her something. I scrolled down. A section titled Legacy and Family appeared. Below it, 3 pictures, one of the bronze statue, one of Claudine hugging a group of mothers, and one that stopped my breath cold. It was a sketch, my sketch, a tree with crooked branches, a little girl sitting beneath it, her head resting on her knees. I'd drawn it the year before the fall during a stormy afternoon when Claudine had locked herself in her room after a phone call from someone she wouldn't name. She'd found the sketch on the kitchen table and said nothing, just took it. And now here it was, framed on her website. The caption read, "Drawn by my daughter before she passed." A reminder that beauty can grow in broken places. I closed the laptop slowly, pressing my hand flat against the lid like it might stop the nausea rising in my throat. She hadn't just erased me, she had claimed my pain. That night, I didn't talk, didn't eat. Elmer didn't push. He made soup, left a bowl for me, and went outside to chop wood until the moon was up. I stared at a blank canvas for hours. And then, without thinking, I dipped the brush in black. The first stroke was the shape of a heel. The next, a pair of small wheels, a sloped edge, a hand, not angry, not cruel, but cold, detached, purposeful. I painted the girl's back facing the viewer, the wheelchair halfway over the edge of a cliff. The woman behind her had no face, only a perfectly styled bob haircut and a tailored suit. The background was gray, the sky darker at the edges. I didn't name it that night, but by morning, the title came on its own, The Fall. When Elmer saw it, he stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. Then he walked over, looked closely, and said, "She'll feel this even if no one else does." He helped me photograph it that afternoon. We used a cheap phone Mason had left in case of emergencies, propped it up on a stack of books, and clicked the shutter in silence. Then he helped me upload it. There was a contest, an online art platform showcasing anonymous submissions under the theme Truth Behind the Smile. I didn't sign my name. I didn't write a description, just submitted the image and clicked enter. It went live within the hour. That night, I checked the site again. There were already 20 comments, a few hundred views. By morning, it had gone viral, not overnight in the Hollywood sense, but quietly, authentically. People were sharing it on forums, tagging it as haunting, visceral, a scream in oil. Some asked about the girl in the chair. Others debated whether the woman was her mother, a caregiver, a politician. I didn't answer, and yet the silence only made it louder. A few days later, a local journalist reached out via the platform's message feature. "I'm with the Ashland Chronicle," she wrote. "Your painting, The Fall, is stirring a conversation. Would you be willing to talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, then closed the browser, and I didn't respond. The reporter published an article anyway. Anonymous local artist challenges narrative of grief with shocking visual statement. Claudine's name wasn't mentioned, but those who knew her, they knew. A blogger in Sacramento connected the dots a week later. Another posted screenshots from Claudine's website beside my painting. The comments exploded, same pose, same lines. This isn't coincidence. Is the girl in the painting real? Who is the artist? Elmer found me sitting outside the cabin with the laptop open, reading through them all. He didn't look surprised. "You've started something," he said. "You ready to see it through?" I shrugged. "I don't know." He nodded slowly. "You can stay Sky and let them wonder, or you can be Dakota and make them look." I didn't answer right away, but that night, I picked up the pencil again and signed my full name, Dakota Jameson. The gallery invitation came a week later. A small but respected exhibition space in Sacramento had reached out through the contest platform. They wanted to showcase The Fall in a collection titled Art is Truth. They asked if I could attend the opening. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It would mean going back to the city that buried me, back to the woman who'd stood over my open grave, smiling for the cameras. I printed the email and showed it to Elmer over breakfast. He read it quietly, then asked, "Do you want to?" I nodded, but I added one condition. "If I go, they can't announce me. No press, no introductions, no spotlight." Elmer raised an eyebrow. "You want them to stumble into the truth?" "Exactly," I said. He smiled. "Then make sure it's worth the fall." I hadn't stepped foot in Sacramento in 16 years. Even as the gallery's van pulled up to the city limits, my palms felt slick against my lap. I had memorized every crack in the cabin floor back home, every way Elmer stirred his coffee, but nothing could prepare me for this, the feeling of returning to the place that once dressed my disappearance as grief. The exhibit was called Voices Unseen, fitting, really. It was hosted in a modest but respected gallery tucked between a boutique hotel and a chain coffee shop downtown. Brick walls, tall windows, dim amber lighting, nothing flashy, but clean, curated. I had told them I'd show up quietly, unannounced. I didn't want to be introduced. No press release, no spotlight. Let them meet the truth before they met the name. I wheeled into the space around 6:30, just as the crowd was beginning to gather. Elmer came with me but stopped at the entrance, leaning against the side of the van like he was waiting on an oil change. "You sure you don't want me inside?" he asked. I shook my head. "I have to do this alone." He nodded, gave my shoulder a firm squeeze, and said, "Then let them see what they've been pretending not to." Inside, the walls bore dozens of canvases, paintings of displacement, of fractured families, of silence filled with unspeakable things. My piece was the centerpiece, covered with a deep charcoal cloth, standing on its own in the largest corner. The label underneath it read, "Untitled Anonymous Submission." People were already whispering around it. "She's supposed to be here tonight," one woman said, sipping white wine. "The artist. I mean, do you think it's about someone real?" Another voice murmured, "I heard the woman in the painting is a politician's wife, a mayoral candidate. I thought it was about abuse." "Look at the hand behind the chair. That's not just guidance. It's intent." I stayed in the shadows listening. My chest ached, not from fear, but from the weight of being witnessed without being named. Across town, in a ballroom lined with gold-trimmed columns and red carpet, Claudine was stepping onto another stage, a campaign gala, final push before the election. Every camera in the room pointed at her as she made her way to the podium. Her dress was navy blue, classic. Her heels clicked like punctuation across the polished floor. Behind her stood the statue, the one I never asked for. Bronze, hollow. Me frozen at age 7 in a wheelchair I didn't get to outgrow, looking forever up toward a sky she never let me reach. The audience clapped as she began. "I'm a mother," she said, pausing with calculated grace. "But more than that, I'm proof that pain doesn't have to end us. It can become the reason we rise." The cameras caught the glint in her eye. She practiced this line, probably in a mirror, probably while wearing that same dress. Back at the gallery, the curator approached me. "Miss," she said, not recognizing me. "It's time." I wheeled toward the covered painting, my hands shaking slightly, not from nerves, but from something deeper. I thought about the cabin, about Elmer's quiet steadiness, about the root I held on to when the river tried to claim me. I reached for the cloth, pulled, and silence fell. The fall was not loud. It wasn't grotesque. It didn't shout, but it told the truth in a way that couldn't be looked away from. There she was, the faceless woman in a tailored suit and red heels, her hand gently pushing the chair forward. And there I was, the girl at the edge of the cliff, half suspended between earth and air, my fingers just beginning to fall. The room didn't gasp right away. It took them a second. Then came the first voice, soft but sharp, "That's Claudine Jameson." Others leaned closer. "It's her. It's definitely her." Phones lifted. Photos snapped. The hush turned into a storm. Across town, Claudine was mid-sentence when her phone buzzed in the pocket of her assistant's blazer. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and leaned in. "You need to see this," he whispered. Her mouth went dry. She turned toward the large screen behind her where the social media live feed had begun flashing with a flood of notifications. Hashtag the fall, hashtag truth unveiled, hashtag Claudine Jameson. The image appeared, projected for all to see, my painting. Her hand paused midair. The smile faltered. "It's her," she muttered under her breath. She tried to recover, lifting the microphone, continuing with a tremble. "We all face trials, some personal, some public, but..." The room had turned. People whispered, some stepped away. Her husband's jaw tightened. The foundation was cracking, and she could hear it. Back in the gallery, a reporter approached me. "Excuse me," she said, glancing at the crowd, the frenzy forming. "Are you the artist?" I didn't look at her at first, just stared at the painting. Then I turned, lifting my chin slightly. "My name is Dakota." The reporter blinked. "Dakota Jameson." I didn't answer that. Instead, I looked directly into the cameras that were now surrounding us. And I said, "I was supposed to die that day." That's what she planned. But she miscalculated one thing: what survives when no one's watching? More flashes, more gasps, more silence wrapped around truth like a blanket too late to warm the cold. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, steady and whole. Let her deny me now with the world watching. When I woke the next morning, the gallery lights and whispers felt like a dream I hadn't quite left behind. But the headlines said otherwise. My face wasn't in them, but my name was. The fall had exploded, hashtag not dead, hashtag Dakota speaks, hashtag the mother who pushed. It was everywhere. Talk shows were dissecting the painting frame by frame, pointing out the shape of the red sleeve, the tilt of the wheelchair, the line of the heel. Commentators speculated if it was metaphor or memory. Some called it a masterpiece. Others called it an attack. But none of them denied it was real. I sat at the small table near the front window of the cabin, laptop open, watching the live feed on a popular news outlet. Elmer stood behind me, silent but steady, sipping his coffee from that same chipped mug he'd had since the first day I arrived. A roundtable discussion was in full swing. "I mean, if this is true, if this young woman really is Dakota Jameson, it rewrites everything Claudine built her career on," one host said. Another added, "We have to remember this is just one side of the story." We haven't heard Claudine respond yet, but it didn't matter. The conversation had already shifted. They weren't debating my existence anymore. They were questioning hers. Across town, in the glossy interior of her campaign headquarters, Claudine wasn't handling it well. She's lying, she screamed, slamming her hand on the conference table. I saved her. I saved us. Her staff froze. One assistant looked like she wanted to disappear into the nearest filing cabinet. Her husband, Daniel, stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, lips tight. He didn't argue. He didn't comfort her. He just watched. Claudine paced the length of the room, heels tapping in frantic bursts. This is a smear campaign. It's political sabotage. Someone found a girl who looks like her, coached her, handed her a brush, and said, "Make it dramatic." Nobody responded. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Maybe we should get ahead of it. Make a statement. Acknowledge the resemblance. Express sympathy. Control the narrative. Claudine turned to him, eyes blazing. You think I'm going to stand up there and admit I pushed my daughter off a cliff? His expression didn't change. Did you? Silence. And that silence, deep and prolonged, was all the answer he needed. He walked out of the room. Later that afternoon, while Claudine was being briefed on how to spin her next public appearance, a journalist from a local investigative outlet uncovered something long buried: a sealed file, a therapist's notes, a single session dated 2 months after Dakota's disappearance. Client, Claudine Jameson. Session summary: client reports overwhelming relief followed by guilt. Direct quote transcribed: I pushed her. I had to. She was ruining everything. It wasn't sensationalized. It wasn't taken out of context. It was her words on paper, signed beneath them in cursive. By sunset, the file had leaked. A respected anchor read it live on air. For years, Claudine Jameson has presented herself as a grieving mother turned public servant. But these documents suggest her grief may have been rooted not in loss, but in something much darker. Sponsors began pulling their support. Endorsements evaporated. Campaign funds dried up faster than wine at a donor dinner. One by one, supporters stepped back. The final nail came 2 days later. A press conference was called. The hall was packed, reporters, cameras, even former volunteers. Claudine walked in alone, but halfway through her prepared statement, Daniel stepped up beside her. She paused, surprised. He took the mic gently from her hand. I didn't know, he said, voice calm. I didn't know the truth. Not the whole truth. I believed the woman standing next to me had endured the worst pain a parent could face. He glanced at her. She looked away. But I learned, along with the rest of you, that she didn't lose her daughter. She left her. Gasps rippled through the room. I can't continue to stand behind someone who built their legacy on a lie, he continued. Effective immediately, I'm filing for legal separation. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Claudine's expression didn't crack, but the blood drained from her face so slowly it looked painted on. Somewhere back in the cabin, Elmer turned off the TV. We sat in silence for a while. He stirred the fire, added a log. You okay? He asked finally. I nodded, but I wasn't smiling. She thought I'd disappear, I said quietly. She thought silence meant she won. He looked at me, that soft, steady gaze I had come to know. But the world heard you, he replied, without a single scream. We didn't say much after that. He poured more coffee. I returned to my sketch pad, but inside me something had shifted again. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about truth. And I wasn't done yet, not until she looked me in the eyes. The invitation arrived 3 days after the press conference. It came not through email, but as a letter, handwritten, postmarked from a Sacramento nonprofit known for advocacy through the arts. I found it sitting on the kitchen table when I rolled in from outside, the envelope leaning against the coffee jar, waiting like a quiet dare. Elmer had already opened it and placed it back in the envelope as if to say, this is yours to decide. Inside was a simple card, ivory with blue lettering. At the top, the name of the event, Art as Witness, Voices That Survive. Below that, a line, we would be honored to host the artist behind the fall as a closing speaker. I read it 3 times before setting it down. They weren't asking me to paint another canvas. They were asking me to speak, To stand in front of a room full of strangers, cameras rolling, microphones open, and lay bare a truth I had never told out loud. "You don't have to go," Elmer said, wiping his hands on a towel, watching me from the kitchen. "I know. You've already said what needed saying." "Not all of it." He nodded, then pulled out the chair beside me and sat. We didn't speak again that night, but he didn't need to ask. He knew I'd made my decision. I packed 2 days later, only what I could carry: a sketch pad, a charcoal case, and something far older, hidden deep in a worn pouch that had traveled with me since I was 7. It had survived the water, the dirt, the silence, a recorder, the old kind. No Bluetooth, no cloud storage, the kind you slip into a pocket when you want to hold on to a voice just in case. I didn't even remember turning it on that day. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was a subconscious plea to leave something behind. But it had recorded every word, and I hadn't played it, not once, not until now. The conference hall was tucked into the old district of the city, past manicured lawns and restored historic buildings that bore more money than history. When we pulled up, the driver, another volunteer from the nonprofit, offered to help me out of the car. I declined. I wanted to roll in under my own strength. Elmer walked with me to the entrance. His boots clicked softly on the polished floor as we approached the reception desk. The woman behind the counter glanced up and smiled warmly. "Ms. Jameson." My breath caught. It was the first time I'd heard that name said with expectation, not judgment or pity. "Yes," I said. She handed me a badge. "You'll be closing the program right after the intermission. We have your painting on display." I nodded, thanked her, and rolled past without looking back. The green room was quiet, empty except for a pitcher of water and a couch too low for comfort. I didn't sit. I needed the tension to stay upright, needed the coil in my chest to keep me focused. I waited until the stage manager came for me. He was young, probably fresh out of college, and had the wide-eyed nerves of someone still getting used to the weight of someone else's truth. He spoke softly. "They're ready for you." The hall was full. I didn't expect that. I thought there'd be a few dozen, maybe some staffers and donors, but the rows stretched far back, filled with journalists, survivors, artists, skeptics. A quiet murmur buzzed through the air like static. At center stage stood a single easel draped in soft fabric, not the fall, but the push, my newest piece, a child on wheels, the hands behind her half shown, a woman's wrist, a ring, no face, only direction. The audience hushed as I rolled forward. I stopped just beside the easel. The moderator stepped up with a mic and smiled politely. "Ms. Jameson, would you like to share a few words before unveiling the piece?" I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out the recorder. "There's one voice," I said, holding it up, "that's never been heard until now." I clicked play. The room fell into silence. The audio crackled first, rough with years of dust and damage. Then came the sound of wind, leaves, a soft exhale, and her voice, clear, cold, calm. "You'll understand one day. This is the only way." A pause. "Goodbye, baby." Then nothing. No screams. No struggle. Just wind again, as if the world itself had turned away. Gasps echoed across the room. Someone dropped a pen. A woman in the third row pressed her hands to her mouth. A man near the exit stood abruptly and walked out. The moderator looked stunned, eyes wide, mic lowered to her chest as if it no longer had a purpose. I let the silence stretch. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just let them sit with it, what it felt like to hear a mother choose her public image over her child. I turned to the easel and pulled the cloth off. The push stared back at them, not beautiful, not poetic, just real. And then I spoke. "I didn't come here for applause," I said quietly. "I came because my story wasn't hers to tell." I wheeled off stage. No music played. No clapping erupted, just a room full of people who had to reckon with what they'd just heard. Claudine was watching from home. That much I knew. The camera feed was live. Her face lit by the screen. A wine glass in her hand. Lips parted just enough to speak, but she never did. She dropped the glass. It shattered on the tile. And something else inside her broke, too. She didn't move. she didn't speak. She just sat there listening to herself destroy me. And now the world was listening too. After the conference, there was no curtain call, no email flood of congratulations, no public invitations or red carpet interviews, just quiet, real, lasting quiet. It settled over me the moment I returned to the cabin, clinging to the trees, the porch, the crackle of Elmer's fire like morning mist. For the first time, it didn't feel like I had more to prove. The story had been told. Now it had to live on its own. Word of Claudine's fall from grace spread quickly. News outlets continued to pick at every angle of the painting, the audio, the fallout, but Claudine herself disappeared. Not figuratively, literally. Her campaign folded within days. Her staffers quit in waves. Donors ghosted her. Public apologies from colleagues and former friends hit social media like popcorn in a hot pan, fast, loud, all flavor and no nourishment. And then nothing. No interviews, no statements, no stage tears or lawyer-crafted deflections. It was like she had vanished into the wind, until a friend from the gallery forwarded me a single grainy photo. It showed a woman walking alone near a small coastal market north of Mendocino, a wide hat, oversized sunglasses, cardigan pulled tight, no entourage, no hair and makeup team, just a former public figure trying to blend into the background of a town that didn't read headlines. There would be no charges, statutes of limitations, lack of formal evidence, legal loopholes too narrow for justice to squeeze through. But her life as she knew it? Over. Elmer didn't say much when I told him, just handed me a mug of coffee and said, "Sometimes the worst punishment is waking up with yourself every morning." He was right, but neither of us could have predicted what came next. It was a Sunday, overcast, with a low breeze stirring the pine needles around the cabin like ghosts whispering. I had just come in from checking on a canvas I'd left to dry on the porch when I noticed his boots by the door, still there, untouched. Elmer never left them behind. I rolled to the back room slowly, quietly pushed the door open with one hand. He was lying in bed, covered up to the chest, his hands folded neatly, as if he had made peace with the leaving. The air was still, too still. I called his name once. Nothing. Then again, and I knew. Grief comes in strange ways, not loud, not always cruel. Sometimes it's in the pause between heartbeats, in the way the chair creaks beneath you when no one else is in the room. I didn't cry right away. I made the calls, signed the papers, sat with the undertaker while he explained cremation and scattered ashes and next of kin. I wasn't his next of kin, but I was his last. A week after the service, a simple one, no flowers, no speeches, I found the envelope tucked beneath the teapot on the shelf he always insisted only he touch. It was addressed in his blocky handwriting, Sky, it said on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once, creased like it had been written and rewritten until the words felt right. You gave me the gift of purpose again. And now go make something beautiful from everything ugly. I sat with that letter for a long time, and when I finally stood up, I felt taller than I had in years. A month later, I accepted a fellowship from an arts foundation that had seen my work. They offered me a chance to lead therapeutic art workshops for trauma survivors across the state, schools, shelters, veterans' homes, places where silence used to live. The first time someone introduced me at a panel, they asked how I wanted to be credited. I said, Sky Dakota Green. It was the first time I'd ever spoken all three names aloud, Sky because she gave me breath, Dakota because she gave me fire, Green because Elmer gave me roots. My life no longer belonged to the woman who threw me away. It belonged to the people who helped me stay. One afternoon, between workshops, I drove to Sacramento alone. The statue still stood. No one had touched it. Bronze doesn't age fast. I parked across the street and sat for a while, watching tourists pass by, glancing up at the girl in the wheelchair like she was just another piece of art in a city full of tragedies. I rolled across the street slowly, deliberately, and stopped in front of the base. There was a small plaque, in loving memory of my daughter. I had considered pulling it off, burning it, replacing the whole statue with something real, but I didn't. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a new plaque, brushed silver, quiet, firm. I placed it at the base, affixed it with strong tape and stronger resolve. It read, "The dead don't speak, but the living can still remember." That was enough. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I opened it slowly. The words were simple: "You're stronger than I ever was. I don't expect forgiveness. I only pray you found peace." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. I read it once, folded it, and placed it beneath Elmer's letter in a small wooden box I kept locked. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away, because there is space between remembering and forgiving, and I needed that space to breathe. Now, most mornings begin with paint under my nails and students who call me Miss G. I listen more than I speak. I never offer advice unless asked, but sometimes I hand someone a brush and whisper, "Start with what hurts." They always do. And something always softens. The last piece I painted wasn't for an exhibit or a competition. It was for me. A girl stood at the edge of a cliff, not falling, not pushed, flying. Her arms wide, her hair lifted in the wind, the chair behind her empty but not forgotten. It was the first canvas I signed without trembling. And underneath my name, I wrote, "I'll never understand how a mother becomes a stranger. But I no longer need to. My name is Dakota, and I was never lost. I was just becoming." Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come with screams. They come in silence, in smiles, in statues built on lies. Dakota's story reminds us that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about reclaiming your voice, even when the world tried to erase it.